In the United States, the cruel case of incest involving the Blackwood family stands as a story you may never have heard, yet one that profoundly marked the judicial and medical history of the 1970s. Deep within the Appalachian Mountains, where the dense green of the trees guards secrets as ancient as the rocks themselves, the Blackwood family lived. To the rare visitors of the small community of Pine Hollow in Western Virginia, this family seemed merely reserved and traditional. But behind the wooden walls of that isolated cabin, a dark reality lay hidden, a reality that would only come to light in 1978, when 23-year-old Margaret Blackwood finally escaped the nightmare that was her own home. The patriarch, Joseph Blackwood, born in 1931, was known in the region as a quiet man of few words. After his wife Ellen died during the birth of their fifth child in 1962, Joseph gradually severed the family's contact with the outside world. Their property, located more than 20 kilometers from the nearest town, became practically inaccessible when Joseph began blocking the access roads with fallen trees and makeshift fences. In that era, it was common for families to live in isolation in the mountains, following old traditions and distrusting strangers, explains local historian Robert Jenkins. But the Blackwood case surpassed all boundaries of what could be considered a simple reclusive lifestyle. On the property lived Joseph, his three sons, Thomas, born 1952, William, 1954, and James, 1958, and his two daughters, Margaret, 1955, and the youngest, Sarah, 1962. The eldest daughter, Elizabeth, had died in childhood from pneumonia, never having received proper medical care. The isolation was nearly total. The boys occasionally went to town to sell wood or trade animals for supplies, but the girls were never seen. The children did not attend school, something that, while uncommon, was not illegal at the time, as Virginia's homeschooling laws were quite flexible. What no one knew was that since the age of 13, Margaret had been forced by her father to assume the role of the family's wife. The horror began just months after her mother's death, when Joseph declared that Margaret would now be the woman of the house. The Blackwood case is particularly disturbing because it represents an extreme form of social isolation combined with forced consanguineous practices, explains forensic psychology expert Dr. Helena Rodriguez. Joseph's absolute control over his children created a microcosm where his distorted rules became the only reality they knew. At 16, Margaret gave birth to her first child, a girl with severe congenital deformities who lived only 3 days. No one outside the family knew of this birth. The infant was buried in a small, makeshift cemetery at the back of the property. Between 1971 and 1978, Margaret would give birth to 5 more children. Only 2 survived, Robert, born in 1973, and Mary, born in 1975. Both showed visible signs of genetic disorders, including fused fingers, cognitive impairments, and, in Robert's case, severe facial malformation. The genetic consequences of consanguinity are well documented, explains geneticist Dr. Thomas Marshall of the University of Virginia. When close relatives have children, the risk of rare recessive diseases and congenital malformations increases dramatically. In the Blackwood family, with multiple generations of consanguineous relationships, genetic problems were amplified to catastrophic levels. The situation deteriorated further when Sarah, the younger sister, began to show signs of puberty. Fearing the same fate, Margaret made the decision that would change everything, to escape and seek help. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel. These real stories of consanguinity reveal a dark side of society few have the courage to confront, but we all must know to protect the most vulnerable. Subscribe to continue your journey through these hidden truths that shape our understanding of the human condition. On the exceptionally cold night of October 17, 1978, Margaret Blackwood, carrying her 2 young children, took advantage of the household slumber to flee. The escape had been meticulously planned for months. Margaret had saved small amounts of money occasionally given by her brothers, gathered some clothing, and, most importantly, memorized the route to the main road. "I remember that night as if it were yesterday," retired Sheriff Clyde Donovan would reveal years later. He was on duty when a disheveled woman with 2 visibly disabled children in tattered clothes knocked on the door of the Pine Ridge police station at 4:30 a.m. She could barely speak. She was in shock, malnourished, and bore obvious signs of prolonged abuse. Margaret's initial account was so disturbing the sheriff initially suspected mental instability, but the consistency of her details and the children's obvious genetic conditions convinced him to investigate. The children barely spoke, recalls nurse Janet Williams, who attended the family at the local hospital. The boy, Robert, had what was later diagnosed as syndactyly, fused fingers, and jaw problems that made eating difficult. The girl, Mary, had severe strabismus and showed clear signs of developmental delay. Margaret's revelation triggered one of the largest police operations in the county's history. The next morning, officers and social workers descended on the Blackwood property. What they found confirmed the reported nightmare. The cabin, built decades earlier by Joseph's grandfather, was in deplorable condition, with no electricity or running water. Makeshift rooms were separated only by torn curtains. At the back of the property, officers discovered the small cemetery. Joseph and his 3 adult sons were arrested immediately. Sarah, then 16, was placed in state custody. Medical exams later revealed she was also a victim, 2 months pregnant. The Blackwood case exposed a reality many preferred to believe no longer existed in modern America, explained social historian Elizabeth Parker. Isolated communities in the Appalachians maintained 19th-century traditions and practices well into the 20th century, some including cousin marriages and, in extreme cases like this, relationships between parents and children or siblings. While the local press initially treated the story with discretion, leaked details soon propelled it to national attention. Journalists from major outlets converged on the small town, shocking residents who had barely known the family existed. "We never imagined something like this could happen so close," Pine Ridge Mayor Harold Johnson said at the time. "Those mountains hide many families living on the fringes of society. But this is something we thought possible only in medieval times." Medical examinations of Margaret, her children, and Sarah revealed the devastating impact of years of consanguinity. Beyond visible malformations, the children had cardiac, immunological, and neurological issues. Sarah, though only 16, already showed signs of early osteoporosis and kidney problems. Prolonged consanguinity has cumulative effects through generations, explains Dr. Marshall. Each successive generation of consanguineous unions increases the burden of harmful genetic mutations, leading to a gradual collapse of physical and mental health. Investigations found that Joseph's own mother, Eliza Blackwood, was his first cousin. This pattern of cousin marriage had been common in the family for at least 4 generations, creating a genetically compromised pool long before the most recent horrors. The trial of Joseph Blackwood and his 3 sons began in April 1979, drawing unprecedented national attention to the small county courthouse. The prosecutor, a determined young attorney named Catherine Reynolds, faced significant challenges. There were no clear precedents for a case of this magnitude, explains legal historian Paul Withers. Most incest cases involved one perpetrator and one victim, not an entire family system built around the practice. The 4 men faced multiple charges, including kidnapping, false imprisonment, and what was then classified as immoral relations within the family. Virginia's laws had not yet modernized their language for cases of forced incest. Margaret's testimony, lasting 3 days, was described by observers as one of the most disturbing moments in American judicial history. Speaking in a near whisper, she described how, at 13, her father announced she would replace her deceased mother. "My father said that was how things had always been done in the mountains, that it was our family tradition," Margaret testified. "He said the family blood needed to be kept pure, that we couldn't trust strangers." When she first resisted at age 15, Joseph locked her in the basement for weeks, feeding her just enough to survive. It was during this time that her older brothers, Thomas and William, also began treating her as a wife. The Blackwood case was not just about one wicked man, explains Dr. Rodriguez. It was about how extreme isolation can create micro-societies with their own rules, where universally condemned behaviors become normalized. If you are watching this story and feel a mixture of horror and compassion for the Blackwood family tragedy, comment now. These mountains hold secrets that should never exist. Your comment helps raise awareness about these hidden realities we must collectively face. During the trial, genetic experts detailed the consequences of prolonged consanguinity. Dr. Richard Collins, a pioneer in forensic genetics, presented evidence that Margaret's children suffered from multiple rare conditions. The odds of some of these conditions occurring naturally are approximately 1 in 500,000, Dr. Collins stated. In families with a history of close consanguinity over multiple generations, those odds increase to 1 in 50. The defendant's behavior only heightened the public shock. Joseph remained impassive, refusing to acknowledge the severity of his acts, famously telling the judge, "No one has the right to interfere with how a man rules his family." Thomas and William seemed genuinely confused as to why they were on trial. Only James, the youngest brother, showed remorse, weeping during Margaret's testimony. The most frightening aspect of the Blackwood case, says Dr. Rodriguez, is how absolute isolation allowed a completely distorted worldview to become the only reality for those children. They grew up believing their actions were normal, even traditional. A shocking development emerged during the trial. Records suggested Joseph himself was likely the product of a relationship between his father and his sister, a revelation that cast new light on the intergenerational cycle. In extremely isolated communities, especially before the 1950s, it was not uncommon for patterns of consanguinity to be established and perpetuated for generations, explains cultural anthropologist Dr. Martha Stevens. These communities developed their own justifications, often mixing distorted religious interpretations with oral traditions about purity of blood. The trial also exposed systemic failures. Though the Blackwood children never attended school or received vaccinations, no investigation had been pursued. A social worker admitted the family had been on a checklist for years, but due to staff shortages and the property's inaccessibility, the case was never properly followed up. The sentencing in July 1979 was historic. Joseph Blackwood received 3 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. Thomas and William were each sentenced to 45 years, while James, deemed less culpable under his father's influence, received 20 years. As the legal case concluded, the real battle for Margaret and her children was just beginning. Medical exams revealed the full, devastating extent of the genetic damage. 6-year-old Robert had not only physical malformations but severe heart problems requiring multiple lifelong surgeries and a critically compromised immune system. 4-year-old Mary suffered from a rare metabolic disorder, required a highly restrictive diet, and had significant cognitive delays with neurological abnormalities. The Blackwood case provided the medical community a unique opportunity to study the extreme effects of multi-generational close consanguinity, explains geneticist Dr. Lawrence Peterson, who followed the case. The problems observed went far beyond typical first-generation consanguinity. Genetic analyses confirmed both children carried multiple recessive mutations, which manifested because they inherited identical defective genes from both parents, the precise risk of consanguineous unions. Sarah faced her own tragedy. Her pregnancy, the result of assault by her father, ended with a premature birth in May 1979. The infant lived only 2 days, suffering multiple organ failures. Sarah's case represents the vicious cycle of consanguinity, says Dr. Rodriguez. She was already a product of a compromised genetic pool, and her child faced even greater challenges. Legal intervention, though late, at least broke this cycle. Margaret, Sarah, and the surviving children faced immense medical and social challenges. After the trial, they were relocated to another state with new identities, in a precursor to modern witness protection programs. The stigma associated with consanguinity is ancient, explains anthropologist Dr. Richard Barnes. When extreme cases like Blackwood surface, they provoke visceral revulsion. The case had significant societal repercussions. In 1980, Virginia revised its child abuse and incest laws, implementing stricter penalties and clearer intervention protocols. Social services nationwide enhanced monitoring for families in extreme isolation. Before Blackwood, there was a cultural reluctance to interfere with traditional families, especially in remote areas, noted historian Parker. This case helped establish that certain practices are unacceptable regardless of cultural or geographical context. Researchers began more systematic studies of isolated Appalachian communities, finding that while Blackwood was an extreme, marriages between first and second cousins were not uncommon in certain remote areas until the 1960s. Geographic isolation, Poverty and distrust of outsiders created conditions for some communities to remain culturally segregated for generations, explains sociologist Dr. Michael Harris. 47 years later, the echoes of the Blackwood case still resonate. Margaret Blackwood, under a new identity, lived a quiet life in the Midwest, reportedly working as a library assistant and dedicating herself to her children's care. She died in 2017 at age 62 from heart complications. Her son Robert, despite numerous surgeries and challenges, achieved partial independence. Her daughter Mary required lifelong institutional care. Sarah, remarkably, became a social worker specializing in child abuse, sharing her story anonymously to educate professionals. Joseph Blackwood died in prison in 1992, never expressing remorse. Thomas and William remain incarcerated, their parole requests denied. James was released in 1999 and lives under supervision. The Blackwood property has been reclaimed by the forest, the cabin was demolished, and few locals can pinpoint its location. The most enduring legacy lies in the social and legal changes the case inspired. The Blackwood case represents a turning point in how American society views its collective responsibility to protect children, says retired Judge Martha Collins. It forced us to recognize that even in a society valuing family privacy, there are limits that cannot be crossed. Scientifically, preserved DNA samples from the family, known as the Blackwood samples in research circles, continue to provide insights into the genetics of multi-generational consanguinity. Educationally, the case is studied across multiple disciplines as a stark warning. The value of this story lies in its power to highlight early warning signs, explains Dr. Stevens. No family reaches this extreme overnight. There is always a gradual process of isolation, control, and normalization that, if identified early, can be interrupted. For Appalachian communities, the case brought unwanted stigma, a point scholars emphasize. It's crucial to distinguish between natural geographical isolation and the pathological isolation imposed by someone like Joseph Blackwood, stresses Dr. Harris. Most families in remote areas maintain healthy community ties and adhere to social norms. If you've watched this far, you are engaged with this story. Leave a comment saying, "I watched here so I can know who truly values these narratives." Don't forget to like this video so more people can learn these necessary stories, and share it with someone who should understand the dangers of extreme isolation and consanguinity. Subscribe to follow more real cases that reveal the obscure facets of human nature and help us protect the most vulnerable. The story of the Blackwood family remains a dark reminder of how extreme isolation, cultural distortion, and individual pathology can make the unthinkable real. It is also a story of resilience, showing how even victims of the most terrible circumstances can, with support, rebuild their lives. In words attributed to Sarah Blackwood in a rare appearance, what happened in Pine Hollow was not our choice. But what we do with this experience now is. Every time a child is rescued from abuse because someone recognized the warning signs, our story gains a new meaning. As the Appalachian Mountains keep their secrets, the Blackwood case endures as a testament to our collective duty to protect the most vulnerable, especially when they are hidden from society's view.